Hello, this is Abid Omar of the Pakistan Air Quality Initiative. Thank you for joining this live stream where we will be joined by Dawar Butt, and we'll be talking about air pollution during this COVID-19 lockdown. A little bit about the Pakistan Air Quality Initiative before we start. We're primarily a network of ordinary citizens, community who are interested in spreading awareness about air pollution issues, and we primarily do that by having a monitoring network throughout the country. We have over 24 monitors in Lahore, a dozen monitors in Karachi, and our awareness efforts are what is helping clean up the environment, such as improving fuel standards in the country. So right now we will be joined by Dawar Butt. And Dawar, here you
Hi,
are.
Abid. How are you?
I cannot hear you yet, so just a moment while I check the audio on my end. Let's start with an introduction of Dawar Butt. He's been a key part of all things air pollution in Pakistan. He's an organizer of the climate strike that took place nationwide last year. And he's one of the few people who has a very prominent voice about all things climate change, environment, and air pollution. So Dawar, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, that how did you get into all of this?
So already you guys know my name. My name is Dawar. The story of me getting into all of this is sort of a personal history as well, because as a Lahori living in Lahore, I got to experience firsthand how environment degradation, pollution, climate change, all of this started affecting our lives within the city. And I was born in Lahore, I was raised in Lahore. So I know how it's sort of how you feel the trajectory went wrong somewhere. You know, the city is either not functioning for its people, it's functioning for industries, transport, vehicles in a sense. The living standards went up in terms of economic indicators, but the feeling of living in a comfortable city got reduced over time as well. So this was about 2018, and I had come back to Pakistan from Europe after my MA, and I'd made the trip in 2017 as well. And in my 2017 trip, I got to feel the full intensity of the smog. I was jogging one day outdoors early morning, and what you'd expect that someone, a healthy individual, can jog 20 minutes, 30 minutes. People who do it frequently can jog up to an hour. But I started feeling inflammation within my lungs, within my chest cavity, right about 5 minutes, 10 minutes into the run. And this was the time when we, in late 2017, when Abid had started putting up air quality monitors. We knew the air quality was bad because the smog issue had come up in 2015 and 16 as well, but we didn't know how bad it was. So while experiencing it firsthand and then having infants in my own family, seeing children go to schools in this sort of pollution started resonating with me, because I come from a public health background. I was a public health consultant right out of university, and that is where my sort of, I would say, became a linkage between public health and environment. And from there on, going deeper into the subject of how climate change and how air pollution is going to be impacting our public health system as a nation and internationally, when we consider the low middle income countries such as our neighboring countries. So all of that becomes interlinked in a sense, and that is where my expertise sort of got me driven to more towards climate change and environmental economics rather than just economics or public health.
That's exactly one of the things that most people miss out. That, you know, when you talk about environment, they just assume that we're talking about having trees planted or having clean streets. but they don't see the linkage between public health. In fact, we know in Pakistan that the air pollution levels are so high that it should be declared a public health emergency. But Davar, recently you did this series of tweets where you showed all these pictures of air pollution levels compared to last year and this year. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, and what are these? What is the difference between the blue sky and the hazy?
So one correction I'd like to make very early is I sort of while designing this, there's a little typo if you notice it. It's supposed to be microgram per cubic meter, but I accidentally wrote it cubic centimeter. So that's the correction I'd like to state over here. Uh, what we see in these two particular images is that what is visible pollution and what we used to sort of categorize as fog about 5 years ago. Everyone in Lahore was really underplaying the extent of the crisis by just saying it's fog, it's always been there. It is very, very true. It's always been in there. The sort of view that you're seeing, it's grown worse over time. But if you go to the historical records of what Lahore's air pollution has been, even before PM 2.5 used to be a thing, if you go back to total respirable particulate matter, which was the unit in the 90s, Lahore was the worst in all of the urban areas in Pakistan. So we have a record. Let me even open it for you. I have this small graph from back 2008 when this wasn't an issue, and even before that, there is a record from a JICA report in the year 2000, and it was largely sort of saying that Lahore is probably the worst if you talk about air pollution in between these cities. So let me, yeah.
So I want to ask you about these pictures. So like you see one here from 19th April, which is this nice blue sky, which is during the lockdown, and we see one from a couple of months ago on 1st November. And it's the same road, the same spot, and in one picture, it's reminiscent of the pollution levels that we see in places like Beijing and New Delhi.
So I put out this image after a couple of people questioned me that January's weather is supposed to be much cooler than April's weather, but both these dates, the weather in Lahore was about 28 degrees in both of these photos. Obviously, seasonal differences occur. You have faster winds in April, but winds alone cannot be responsible for the direct consequences we're seeing of emissions. It's a relation between the natural environment and the meteorological effect of the entire weather. And then obviously you were putting out a much bigger chunk of emissions in November because you have traffic. The 1st November picture, both of these pictures are actually 10 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m. So you also see the impact of early morning traffic on the 1st of November. On 19th April, most of the city is shut down. You don't have industries running. You have the power consumption around the city is down. So you just have the domestic usage, which is stable at about 50% of the power consumption. And of course, when industries consume less power, the thermal power stations around Lahore are also producing much lesser power and consuming much less furnace oil or coal. So in a sense, the overall emission load which Lahore used to produce in regular circumstances has been removed from the picture, and then you have a blue, clean sky. The mornings are clear. Whatever emission is produced is, of course, pushed out through the breeze that we usually have in the spring season. And the purpose of these pictures weren't just to show the air quality index. It's to show that how the city looks when the air is clean. You do not have to confuse it with smog or fog at this point. You just have to look at the pictures and see that even if you can take out the hazardous and healthy comparison, just look at what sort of low PM 2.5 level, a clean AQI can make your city look much more presentable. And when we talk about presentation, I always go back to this, is that Beijing was not going to clean up if China never had the 2008 Olympics. It became a PR issue when international athletes were coming in and they saw the bad air quality. And China was really, really angry that this shouldn't have happened. Beijing usually is, for citizens themselves, it wasn't a big matter because, as Lahoris tended to say, that it's fog, we're used to this. Citizens in Beijing used to say that this is fog, we're used to this. But when the international exposure got back,
Dawar. So I used to live in Beijing. I wasn't there during the Olympics, but I was there soon after. And at that time, so we're talking about 2009. There was no Twitter. A lot of the foreign internet was blocked in China. It was very difficult to get outside information, and at the same time, there's very little conversation about air pollution at all. So yes, while they did start the cleanup action for the Olympics in Beijing, and you know what they did? Basically, they said nobody's allowed on the streets except movement related to Olympics during the Olympics themselves. All industry was shut down, not just in the city, but for hundreds of kilometers outside the city. Another example, more recent example, was the G8 event that happened in Hangzhou. Not only did they shut the city down, they gave residents rebates to travel outside and go on vacation. And you had perfect blue skies. But let's go particularly about Beijing, is that in 2012, when the original, say, New York Times story broke out in November and December, there was a lot of hue and cry that, the US consulates, the US embassy cannot be reporting this data, and it's not allowed, and it should be shut down. And, there was a time when people used to say that this is not fog, this is not smog in the sky, but rather this is just, beautiful foggy day, and how nice it is, and how nice and misty. And I, living there, used to point out to people, look, I can see this data on this Twitter app, and it's showing me that it's highly polluted. And they'd be like, no, this is nothing to worry about. And this would be in the afternoon. You'd be looking up towards the sun. It would be totally covered in a yellow haze. You can't see anything. But fast forward a year, Beijing, after denying the problem for the next many months, behind the scenes, they set up a monitoring network of thousands of stations, not just in Beijing, but throughout the country. And within a year later, they started releasing the data to the public while announcing the very major policies to improve air quality. So it's not that they were ignorant or hiding it. What they have done is actually exemplary, and it's a practice for anyone in the world to follow, especially when you're in a place like Pakistan or India, where the conversation is still very much in the early stages.
Yeah, when you compare, even India is sort of ahead of the curve, because what Delhi experiences is very, very similar to Lahore, but even a notch up, because Delhi itself is surrounded by a lot of urban industry and settlement. You have urban sprawl all around Delhi as well. What the issue with even Lahore right now in Pakistan is that our own activism, our own conversation and communication in the first few years sort of restricted ourselves to Lahore. But as we placed more monitors, as we saw in Gujranwala, as we are seeing with the satellite data, is that it's not even just Lahore, it's Punjab, and even beyond Punjab, it's all major urban areas throughout Pakistan. And as Mahira says in our private chat, that air pollution is a worldwide issue. I think it's about time that we also take the hashtag up a notch instead of Lahore smog and start calling it what it is, that it's air pollution and it's present in all of Pakistan. That is where when we put out analysis, that's why we tend to not only restrict to Lahore anymore. The recent research report that we did with Center for energy and clean
Yeah,
air.
yeah.
Yeah.
Before you get into what that research report was about, I just want to ask you a
Yeah.
question. So, what's the backstory on that? How did you end up collaborating with CREA?
So the CREA is fairly new, as you might know. It wasn't active about 2 3 years ago. It's fairly new. It has a lot of analysts who are dealing with clean air in specific, but their backgrounds range from economics, energy, a lot of people from different regions, but most of them dealing with South Asia and East Asia. And they were fairly insistent that we need to put out this data and we need to start put out what is happening in Pakistan in the in front of international cameras as well, because we're seeing repeated analysis of what's happening in Hubei. We saw what happened in northern China as well. Everyone knows it became news for Reuters, it was in the Financial Times, and similarly, you had analysis from all over India being put out in international publications, but no one was putting out data and analysis of what's happening in Pakistan. Even though Pakistan is fairly similar to India in terms of its economic advancement, both are low middle income countries, and again, Punjab suffers very high levels of air pollution, much like what northern India suffers from. So it was important to put this out. Sunil and the editor at Kriya reached out that we'd already done some sort of communication work on this, but they wanted to put out a formal analysis along with recommendations, along with what's happening on ground. And of course, international analysts cannot pinpoint what are these hotspots. For example, even if you look at this image, Lahore's
Right.
uh, this particular comparison shows that there's a northwestern hotspot in Lahore, and towards the south you have Raivan to Patoki. So Raivan to Patoki development is fairly recent, so the hotspot isn't as big. The northwestern part of Lahore, which is the Lahore Sheikhupura Road, is where the motorways goes out, where the GT Road goes out as well. So you have industrial development along the GT Road and as well. So that's why it's very, it's not densely populated. It's just pockets of industrial zones, and all of these industrial zones are powered by small furnace oil power plants, or they have their own diesel generator setups. So this is why you see the hotspots, and the hotspots, while Lahore's urban emissions went down and it turned blue from orange, those hotspots are still sort of slightly blue because the thermal power stations are going to remain active. The some
Well,
of the industry.
that is one of the big issue when you look at analysis like this from a layman's perspective, because the initial picture is showing you, yes, it's no longer a hotspot over Lahore or over Sheikhupura, and now everything looks blue and rosy. But what's really hiding behind this is that the pollution levels are still above safe limits in
Yeah.
spite of this dramatic reduction that we're seeing here. So, in my opinion, that is what is really the big story here. That why haven't the air pollution levels come down even more drastically?
This is what we had. We were questioning what was happening in China, and the reason that was given to us is that Beijing still had a little bit of smog. Wuhan had bad air as late as January, even though the cities were on lockdown. And the simple reason for that was that a lot of energy in these areas still comes from coal power plants, and Beijing is dotted with steel industry on its outskirts. So in that sense, we see a similar analysis for Lahore as well, that industrial hotspots or industries, especially industries which cannot be abruptly shut down, usually tend to whatever sort of calamity that might hit, you would have minimal workforce, but the processes, the furnaces, the generators will have to remain on because a lot of these industrialists, do not want them to go offline because turning them back on is usually more expensive. And this is much more noticeable in for Karachi's analysis as well.
One thing that a lot of people don't know is that practically all the industry in Pakistan, besides using, the ones you're talking about, having to keep their furnaces in operation, all the industry generates its own power. They do not rely on the national grid for their energy supply. So all around Lahore, Sheikhupura, especially the big textile industries who are running these steam boilers, they're actually using coal as an energy source. And when you're talking about small power generation on a very, very small scale, you're talking about maybe 1 megawatt or a couple of megawatts. This is extremely inefficient. So while I do believe that most of it has been shut down during the lockdown, this is one of the major contributors to air pollution in the area. And I've heard in years before when there's been a shortage of coal, people have been actually using wood as well, or whatever fuel, plastic
Exactly.
bags and so forth, rubbers
This
and
is
tires.
the particularly when you talk about just running the boilers and maybe the brick kilns, you rarely can be assured what sort of fuel that's going into these things, because in a lot of cases it's just piles of trash that are burned as a fuel source. So in a sense, uh, even our analysis cannot be as in depth or disaggregate all of what's happening right now, but we can at least pinpoint that these are zones that went offline, and these are areas where you still see hotspots. But overall, central Lahore and some industrial areas still had NO2 levels which are beyond what is recommended by WHO, or which even is beyond by the emission quality standards for Punjab and the national emission quality standards. Oh, there's a question from regarding the link between COVID and air quality. I think what we have so far pinpointed is that air quality, wherever it's bad, you have a much more vulnerable immune system, much more vulnerable respiratory system, and that tends to make you more vulnerable to the sort of respiratory attack that happens as a result of COVID-19. And a lot of these patients, especially in the US, where much more data and reporting is coming from, suffer really, really horrible respiratory attacks. And these are very, onset of these is this is very sudden. They also experience seizures, and air pollution is also something that usually tends to be responsible or behind these sort of sudden onsets and diseases. What COVID-19 is going to do is people who have already have been exposed to high levels of air pollution, like in Punjab, in North India, in China, their systems are already weak, especially their respiratory systems. And that gives a chance to the virus itself that an already compromised immune system and already compromised respiratory system is not going to withstand for long against the full onset of the virus. There's a difference. Some people have the virus, might not feel the symptoms as such, a lot of asymptomatic cases. But people who are really vulnerable, especially the 50 plus demographic, is they have suffered from bad air in the past few years, but the bad air has now sort of disarmed them to fight a virus that is going to attack the respiratory system. And obviously, poor air quality did not cause the virus itself, but any region that suffers from bad air quality is going to probably be much more susceptible to have a much bigger outbreak of COVID-19. I was just answering this question in the chat.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask here also that, I mean, how does one protect oneself from coronavirus? We've all been hearing about the mask debate. So, what is your take on masks and
Yes.
air
So
purifiers and such
if
things?
you remember when you were in Lahore last year, I brought up the subject of how masks make you really, really uncomfortable, especially if you're exercising and jogging outside. You have this buildup of humidity. You also have you you can basically feel the discomfort at hand, but at least it's protecting your health. At this point, the wearing a mask has been normalized so much that people are even wearing cloth masks, which might not be as effective, but at least they have forgone the discomfort aspect of the entire usage of masks. And of course, that is encouraging because maybe you'll have more people using masks during the smog season. You will also
But
be
that is absolutely true. That up till a couple of months ago, when people like us who were more aware about this issue and wanted to take some basic steps to protect ourselves from air pollution, I would be going around wearing masks, and some of my family and friends would be doing the same. But it was very awkward in a way because people would be looking at you and wondering, what is this? So even in China, masks sort of got an early normalization back in 2003 when SARS hit
starts
China.
happen. Yeah.
And in fact, all across Asia, like in Japan and South Korea, masks entered the mainstream. And while living in Beijing, in the beginning, yes, you did see a lot of people wearing masks. If you travel on an airplane, you often see an Asian-looking person wearing a mask, and you'd wonder what all that was about. So masks were not used over there initially to be protecting yourself from smog or air
Yeah.
pollution at all. It was rather just protecting yourself from bacteria and viruses that might be in the air. Fast forward to today, everyone is saying, wear a mask. If you can't get an N95 mask, if you can't get, something very specific, then wear a cloth mask. So in fact, one of the messages that I have to people, which is not something new for me. I've been saying that for years. Like you should be taking basic steps to protect yourself. If you don't have a mask, if you don't have an air purifier, those are very expensive things to have in Pakistan. Then at least be aware of the air pollution levels. Don't go out if you can avoid it. But if you do go out, wear a mask and wear whatever mask you can afford. Put a handkerchief over your face, put a cloth mask, put a surgical mask, an N95 mask. I also fashioned one mask out of cloth just for my own checking that, why can't just every Pakistani be wearing a cloth mask? So they're very easy to make. Everyone has, well, not everyone, a lot of people have a sewing machine at home. They have leftover fabrics. In fact, it's pretty common in Pakistan to be making your own dresses. You might not make that at home, but you'll go buy the fabric and you go to your tailor and you'll spend time designing it. So it's very easy for a lot of people, for a big segment of society here, to be able to put on some kind of a mask or the other. So
Yeah, and one thing, and the thing that we discussed earlier as well is that the virus itself is raising a lot of awareness around medical equipment and protective devices. So there is a high chance that local manufacturing at a large scale, or even for very local purposes, is going to happen, and that will reduce the prices of these masks in the off season. Say for whenever the virus does end, you'll have a lot of these masks in the local market for low cost, and then the willingness to pay for these particular respiratory protective equipments is of course going to adjust it with the market prices. uh, this hopefully will increase awareness around protective masks, and probably a byproduct of a lot of this is going to be more awareness, people protecting themselves better, and as a result, in a lot of cities, we'll see that pollution-linked burden on hospitals, on public health system may reduce because people are now willing to buy these masks and know the sort of benefit of having them.
So here, I just wanted to like very briefly visit why these kind of simple solutions are effective. So let's just talk about how masks really work. So here you're looking at the size of a PM10 particle. You're looking at a red blood cell. You're looking at a PM2.5 particle. You're looking at a typical bacteria. And finally, you see the 0.1 micron size, which is the size of the coronavirus. There have been a lot of studies that have shown that masks can filter down to 0.007 microns. Both masks and HEPA filters, which are commonly used in air purifiers. So effectively, what masks are doing, they're preventing these particulates, whether they be coronavirus or smog, from entering in. And when you prevent them from coming in, they're also then prevented from, being exposed to your mouth, to your nose, and eventually entering your respiratory system, where they start to create havoc. So it is a very, very simple step that people can do if you're out in public. Like I came across this wonderful example of, when is it appropriate to wear a mask? It's the same as when is it appropriate to be wearing, your trousers out in public. You're not walking around naked in public. So that's the thing. You should be wearing a mask all the time when you're in public. So, and
One thing that during the earlier outbreak, we were confused if what is the size of the coronavirus, and some people argued that the coronavirus particle itself is too small to be filtered. And later on, as we have more research available, what happens is that the coronavirus particle itself is transferred through aerosol that comes out as a result of sneezing or coughing, or if you just breathe out. And aerosols, what we've usually seen is that aerosol particles are ranged from zero point 0.3 to 2.5 microns, and those particles themselves carry the virus. So this is why masks are actually effective, that masks stop the aerosol particles which carry the virus. And this is why masks in some cases have to be re-sterilized, and if you want to reuse them, you sterilize them again and again, because the aerosol particle is either stuck to the surface of the mask, or if it's a cloth mask, maybe in one of the layers of the cloth. But at the same time, all the masks available, even a simple t-shirt, is effective. And all individuals, it should be, at this point, it should be a part of the policy. And I think the KP government, Temu Jhagda, who's the health minister in KP, has actually made this a policy that citizens coming out for buying groceries, etc., should wear a mask, and probably should be a policy all over the country.
Talking of policy, one thing which people, which is very critical, is that when you do talk about N95 masks, then you're also talking about certifications. And so people should not be just willy-nilly saying that this mask is N95, or what's criminal is the textile industry here has started selling isolation gowns and other protective gear which are used in hospitals, made out of fabrics or made out of materials which are not appropriate for that application. So that is something everyone should know. Wear a mask, but you should know that it is giving you a certain level of protection. Maybe you're getting 80% protection, but you're not getting the certified 95 or 99% protection. And people selling them as that is very, very misleading, and actually should be considered a criminal.
And in a lot of cases, people who have made masks are probably not going to get certifications anyway, because a lot of international manufacturers are already in line with these bodies like NIOSH or China's national accreditation. All of these manufacturers themselves are not getting accreditation at this point. So at least government procurement officers should be concerned about what sort of equipment they're getting, have some sort of basic level testing at least within Pakistan, but don't pretend to give out certifications, because these are international level certifications that only particular bodies can be given?
Well, there can be a Pakistani standard
Yeah,
to certify masks and other equipment, because actually the testing procedure is not that difficult.
it's the same for.
We're we're looking again at the different particulate matter, and what the basic test for masks or PPEs is that they check the efficiency of how much of this small particles is passing through. So they're actually testing the pore size and filtration efficiency. So without doing certifications, you could at least have a standard and have locally available testing done, which, as far as I know, there is no national laboratory which even has the equipment to carry out those tests. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be great to know that there is such a place, because if I'm getting hold of a mask, I'd love to even get it tested myself.
I actually checked about this because we wanted to see a certain fabric that the melt-blown fabric that is used as a filter. We wanted to see if the products available in Pakistan go up to the standard, but the bodies responsible within Pakistan, like PCSIR or Pakistan, the PCSQA, which quality assurance organizations, none of them had the apparatus required. So I'm pretty sure it might be available with some university which has a department which specializes in biochemicals or chemicals, simple chemistry labs as well. But the organizations responsible for the testing and certification are not doing the job of doing it for the government at this time.
Correct, correct. So we have a viewer question. Tamur is asking, will the clear skies go away after lockdown? So
There are
what's your
already
take
gray
on
skies
that?
in Lahore. The skies in Lahore have already turned gray, so that's not a question. It's already been answered. And you, as long as you had winds and you had lower vehicle concentration till last week, you had blue skies and the clouds were visible. But right now, today, the skies are gray again, and a lot of vehicles are back on the road as well, and you really don't know where all of these people are driving to. But I go out to grocery shop at 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. latest, because even my own parents are scared. I have immunocompromised grandparents, and even my own mother is immunocompromised, so we cannot risk it happening within our homes. So at least the Google mobility report for this week is going to show what sort of trend we are seeing. A lot of the traffic is back, and the return of the traffic has also brought back the PM 2.5 and NOx and SO2s. So it isn't going to stay as long. Maybe when you have monsoon rains again, you'll have blue skies, but this won't be permanent.
So I mean, we're still in a practical lockdown. The majority of people are not on the streets. The majority of industries are not operating. Stores are shut down. And yet, even with a little bit of relaxation on a lockdown, we're starting to see elevated levels of air pollution. So, what is the solution to all this? I mean, beyond COVID-19, like what should Pakistan be doing? In fact, in your article, you gave a series of recommendations. So, what are they?
So, the primary issue we keep on going back to in Pakistan is the sort of energy that we're producing, which comes from really, really dirty fuels, which have been outlawed in most of the developing and the developed world. And these are both the low quality diesel we use, the low quality gasoline we use, and again, we keep on coming back to this, the sort of fuel used by power stations. We have furnace oil, we have coal, and a lot of locally available coal is not of a high quality. It has a high ash content as well. And then you go around these industrial areas, you find out what sort of fuel is being used by boilers, what sort of fuel is being used within a brick kiln, and you find out that they don't even have they don't have a proper fuel. They are going to use agricultural waste, your regular plastic.
How do we get better fuel in Pakistan?
Well, so if you talk about, let me just, when we talk about fuel quality, the fuel quality for which is publicly available is obviously what the public is going to be dependent on. If you're going to be importing or producing or refining low quality fuel, the public is going to be using that fuel. Most of the public, 99 of the public, are not experts, they're not chemical engineers, they do not know what sort of petroleum quality is available in Pakistan. So this is a job which is uh, more easy to understand by people who belong to the energy segment. That if there are two options, Pakistan needs to outlaw the fuels which are high in sulfur content, which are high speed diesel below Euro 4 standard. And of course, the high sulfur furnace oil needs to be outlawed as well. It has been outlawed internationally. You cannot sell it to any other country, but it still is it's a byproduct of the refining process, so it's going to be made anyway. So Pakistan needs the solution to all of this is upgrading the refineries or establishing new refineries, which may be using technologies like hydrocracking, which allow for cleaner variants of fuel to be produced. The second part of the solution to this mix is that Pakistan needs to start working towards a more eco-friendly, sustainable, renewable model, because the current projections, as they stand, by coming from when you talk about NEPRA, when you talk about NTDC, or government bodies linked to energy production and transmission, their plans continually say that till 2040 they're going to keep adding power to the grid, and a lot of that power is going to come from coal, both local and imported coal. Some of that power is also going to
Yes.
come from renewable sources, LNG as well. And
So
LNG is,
it's essentially what we're looking at is that our energy source is so poor that and to fix that is the only way, or rather the first
yeah.
thing that needs to be done. Just last week there was this report that was released about our energy forecast for till 2040, and one of the things that mentions is that the profits charged by our energy producers are criminal. And in fact, our president had used some very choice words on that in an interview. But I think that's another topic, and we need to revisit that. Let's just take another question from our viewers: that does an increase in air pollution result in higher incidence of COVID-19? I know you had talked about that earlier, but could you just
So it
summarize that?
this is fairly, it's sort of a equation that you create, that a human being exists. Let's put 10 points to a human being, and human beings with reduced respiratory capabilities from air pollution or asthma, the diseases that come out of air pollution, let's minus 5 points out of the 10, and then you have five remaining. And then further, COVID is going to further reduce your capacity to fend off yourself. So a human being with who points, say, 10 versus 5 is going to always be weak. So this is a simple question that can be answered this way, that people who have grown up, who are growing up, who live in polluted environments are going to be much more vulnerable. And this is something that is being studied in northern Italy right now, because the Milan region itself also sort of suffers from haze and smog in the winter months. Because if you look up on a map, north of Milan are the Austrian Alps, and the Austrian Alps sort of trap a lot of the pollution coming out of Milan. So they trap the pollution towards the south, which is Milan and the cities around it. And one of the reasons people are we saw a lot of deaths in that particular northern Italy area is it could be linked to higher amount of travel as well, but some scientists are also linking it to higher levels of air pollution.
So let's wind up the discussion with a bunch of recommendations. You know, we've been talking about air pollution, COVID-19, masks. So what resources would you point people to who might want to learn more? Or you could actually recommend anything that you want. So if you could give us two or three recommendations. We'll
So
add links
starting
to them in the comments.
this is something that someone on Twitter also asked me. There's actually a free course that Harvard is giving out right now, and it's titled "The Public Health Effects of Climate Change." And if you go, that's sort of where I entered the whole fray as well, and I usually introduce the subject this way to a lot of people because it makes it more personal. Then you know how your families might be suffering in the future as well. Your offsprings might suffer. So personalizing climate change and air pollution and environmental degradation is very, very important. The first few resources in this regard are obviously going to be the World Health Organization pages, which are offer a very good explainer to what PM 2.5 is and how it is going to affect your health. On a local level, we've put out numerous articles that have come either in print media or on digital media, which explain why it is happening in Pakistan. It explains what sort of proportions each sector is responsible for, which fuel is causing a lot of this, how much agriculture is responsible. So when citizens know where this pollution is coming from, they can fairly act their representatives and demand from policymakers to start targeting these particular sectors because these particular sectors are responsible for the air pollution. More targeted approach will bring us short-term solutions as well, and in the future we can work on a much more long-term policy like China has in right now. China has been reducing on average 10 to 15 microgram per cubic meter of PM 2.5 from the air annually. And that is what we should be aiming for right now. That if we start cleaning up Lahore or Karachi right now, it will take us a minimum of 10 years to go back to moderate or healthy air
Well,
quality.
I don't know if it'll take us 10 years because Beijing has shown us a way that where there's a will, you can pretty quickly clean up the air
Mm.
in a couple of years while keeping economic activity, unchecked
Yeah.
in many ways. And in fact, that is a big misnomer where people believe that cleaning up the environment means that you go into a lockdown like we are today. Guess what? When Beijing cleaned up its air, its rate of economic growth did not go down. In fact, it accelerated. Same case for LA very recently in the 1990s. So I'd like to also then end with some of my recommendations. One is the Tabad Labs Pakistonomy podcasts, which just came out yesterday, which talks about that power sector report and why it's a big mess, and why when we read the media reports that the energy sector is walking away with huge profits, actually that's wrong. And so Amar Habib, I believe, takes a
Yeah.
deep dive into the whole accounting of that, and why we misunderstand that. And I think that's a very important thing to know, that what role exactly the energy sector have, because that is one of the main sectors where we can go after when we talk about improving air quality. The other recommendation that I have is this website, which is called wearafnmask.com, because not enough people are wearing masks. You walk around in the streets, and yes, you see everyone with a mask, but it'll be like hanging off underneath their nose, or it'll be around their chin. People aren't really yet aware about the importance of masks. So there needs to be a lot of education around it. And wear an effing mask is a good place to start to inform yourself and get educated about this whole issue.
There's I would like to add, there's also a desi version of this. I opened a masksbanow.com. So it's
Masksnow.com.
Banao, B-N-A-O.
Oh, Mask by Now. Excellent.
Yeah, this is Desi version, and it's very, very well designed. I found about it this 2 days ago, and I've been forwarding it to a lot of people. Uh, we can simply be raising awareness on this as well. There are a few questions. If we should we answer the regarding the fuel quality. One question is, will the fuel become more expensive? No, the fuel won't become more expensive if you change it to a cleaner source, because it's basically being the refined fuel quality is what we sign up for. If we are currently buying a lot of the fuel from Kuwait, and it per barrel, it doesn't make much of a difference, and it won't be passed on to the consumer as such. Maybe
Actually,
a
per
few
liter,
rupees.
the last one I checked, when the fuel prices, I mean, in Pakistan they've still been the same, but you know, before the barrel price crashed recently, the impact of improving fuel quality in rupee terms was something like 1 rupee.
Yeah.
And the benefits of that is in the billions of dollars of, you know, the improved health, improved, you know, you have a lot of health costs and life cycle expectancy, mortality rates, so forth. So there are a lot of indirect benefits from this 1 rupee cost, which is not even a percentage of the price of oil in Pakistan. So, Dawar, we will let's answer the rest of the questions in the Facebook chat, because we're running close to an hour, and it's always good to keep these limited to 1 hour. And we are going to be looking for more speakers. Do come up with recommendations, and we look forward to hearing your comments about how we did on the show and what topics you would like us to follow up with. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.